So I burned my timeshare joke already, and it would have been a perfect time to come into that. So when I go around talking to people, the number one thing that I end up running into or discovering tends to be the biggest problem that they're running into is they don't have a really repeatable process. So finding your flow is really going to be talking about how do you define what it is that you do, what is your day-to-day workflow, and how do you do your job. So real quick, introduce me, kind of explain what is a workflow, why is that important, how do I find my flow, give you some best practices, key ideas, concepts, and then leave room for you guys to ask questions at the end. So that being said, I'm going to give you what's not on the slide as well. I talk really, really fast sometimes, so feel free to say slow down. There's a reason for that, which you'll see in a minute. But if you do have questions, again, for a reason you're going to see here in a second, hold them until we get to the Q&A, because otherwise we may not finish. So I own two consulting companies, one that is focused on quality and quality assurance. The other one is primarily around process improvement, workflows, best practices for businesses, individuals, organizations, etc. I was director of QA for Home Advisor. I worked here in Nashville for MedHost and was also in leadership at Scripps Networks doing a lot of what you're seeing here today for Food Network, DIY, HETV, etc. I've been doing this for 22 years. My kids like to remind me how long I've been doing this. And I'm really, really passionate about this subject or topic because I didn't put it on here, but I'm really lazy for this reason. I'm severely ADHD, and if you do get me off on the question, we literally might not finish the thing. Like that will be the end of the presentation. I apologize, but that's just how I get. So all of that stuff combined led me to figure it out, hey, this is not something that's unique to me, right? This is not something that just I have to deal with. This is something that everybody deals with. Everybody I talk to runs into these types of problems. So, what's a workflow? According to the dictionary, it's a simple sequence of events that tell you what it is you're doing going from start to finish. That's it. It's really, really simple. So here's the TLDR for those that are tired of listening already and want to go. There's no super sauce that makes this work. There's no magic bullet. A lot of this you'll find is common sense. The hard part is actually taking the time to sit down and figure it out. That's actually the hardest part. And knowing what tools you need to do that becomes the bigger question. So I talk more than I read off the slides, so if you all have a question about what's on the slides, it's more for visual references. Feel free to pipe up if you can't read anything. So why is it important? First of all, consistency and scalability. Some of you are small organizations or individuals, and that may not seem like a big deal to scale. So I'm going to show you a very real problem that happened. This is a very well-known internet company in year one. They had a handful of people on their initial development team. No big deal. Everybody was on the same page. They could talk back and forth. You know, things were good. 13 years later, things are still pretty good, right? Two teams. You get in a little bit of loss of knowledge. Some tribal knowledge has been lost. Not everybody's got as much information as the other guys. And then you got one guy over here who's kind of starting to have some different ideas about how the organization should be run. So let's fast forward 2 years, and so they talk, but this is what the organization looked like 2 years after that. Notice how few of the blue is left and how much things have drastically changed. This is not a made-up example, unfortunately. This is actually a very real example of a company that most of you have heard and seen do business every day. The problem was they had no systems in place so that when they did hit that massive growth spurt, they could actually train new teams to come on board and to start doing things. So they tried spreading some of their initial development teams out among the teams, but you notice you still have a very large, and then the one team over here that's not anywhere close to what the original concepts were, yeah, that side of the organization literally went off in its own path, and it did whatever it wanted to do. This led to an unbelievable number of issues in production. Site downtime, they had a downtime of almost 48 hours at one point, which for an internet retail site, commerce site, that's a big deal. So this is one of the most challenging projects I ever worked on. Bringing them all back to the same page and getting everybody onto a consistent. We didn't do anything other on this project other than we just simply said, everybody stop, documented what the process was, what the expectations were, and had every team following the same thing. Because even the teams that were kind of sort of close were still doing something just different enough that when it was time for production rollout was just a nightmare. So it was really, we got 30% improvement just on documentation. Like, you know, and when I say documentation, I mean simply drawing a picture of what it was that they did to do their job. So that's why scalability is really important. And if you notice that conversation up at the top, can't really hear him anymore. There's a little speech bubble that, you know, when it was a small two-person or two-team shop, you could hear each other pretty easily. On the floor there, yeah, you couldn't hear a thing. So dilution of your tribal knowledge, if you will, is a real thing. I mean, it's a problem that if you are planning to grow and you are planning to scale, or you expect changes in the organization and you don't have it documented or a process or a plan in place, it's going to be very difficult to have any sort of consistency. Will that show up on day one that person leaves? No, but in 6 months you'll find out exactly how much that person was doing or that team was doing that you didn't know about because it wasn't documented anywhere. And they were just kind of doing their job. Well, nobody knew what their job was. Context switching is bad. Does anybody know how bad context switching is, just out of curiosity? So they've actually done studies on this. And for those of you that think multitasking is a great idea, here's some bad news for you. This is a study done by the University of California. 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back on task anytime you context switch. Sure, you might get back to some things right away, but anytime you try and stop and do something else and come back to that other thing you were doing, you've got a 23-minute break, right? How much time does that add up if you're doing that multiple times a day? Right there is half your day, at least. I know some people that get 80% of their day wasted on context switching because they're a sole entrepreneur and they're trying to do everything. And that's okay, but they don't have a process to do everything. So they just bounce from, well, this thing needs to be done now, so now I got to go do this. And then they bounce, oh, an email just came in that means I got to take care of this. So they bounce over to that. And, you know, that started at 10 a.m. and at 4:30, their wife's calling going, what time are you going to be home? And they haven't even done the thing that they started with in the morning. So what's that? But that's a very common thing. That's whether you're a sole entrepreneur or you're working in a big business, doesn't matter. I have this problem, and I do this for a living, and it's a problem for me. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's one of the reasons why understanding what it is you're doing is important. This is if there's one thing, the other picture is a great visual. But if there's one thing that like really shocks people at how much time they're actually wasting, it's this slide right here. So the other thing that it does is, if for no other reason, great, you don't suffer from the first problem, you don't suffer from the second problem, having a complete picture of what it is you actually do actually is a problem. A lot of people, if you have them sit down and draw you on a whiteboard what their day looks like, most people can't do a consistent day. They can't tell you, well, this is what my role is, or this is what my job is, because there's no consistency to it. Or there's things that they do every once in a while that they should be doing regularly, but because they don't have a place to put that in their schedule, or they don't know when they should be doing it, it just gets dropped. So having a complete picture of what it is starts to bubble up some of those things that you're doing without realizing you're even doing it. And then the biggest one for me, go back, reduces your overall stress levels. Knowing what you have to get done and when it has to get done and who needs to do it and or where it needs to get done, all of these things does wonders for decreasing your stress levels, right? If you take all of the stuff from the first couple of issues that we talked about and start eliminating those from your day-to-day, all of a sudden your stress levels are way down. It's just going to happen. And I can speak from personal experience, it makes a huge difference. So how do I find my flow? We spent a lot of time on the why, but the how is actually pretty simple. Document what you're doing today. Just start writing it down, what your day-to-day looks like. It could be something as simple as this, right? And trust me, if you think this is complicated, this is actually pretty simple. But this diagram, the initial problem children that I showed you earlier with the different teams and the spread out dilution of tribal knowledge, et cetera, this is all we did. This is their workflow and their process. This is all we defined for them. We put it together and documented it, and that was it. Figure out, so take a look at the thing and say, okay, well, we're doing this. This is how it works today. What you'll find is, especially if there's multiple people involved, there's another version of this document that has things, additional things up here and down here and over here and up here that these different teams are doing, but they were the only people that knew that they were doing those things to make this work. So just putting it on paper, we rearranged some of the other workflow items and how things move through the process to accommodate those other things that needed to happen without it being a detractor from the overall process, right? And still simplifying and streamlining. So, like I said, you're going to find gaps and inefficiencies on here, and that's good. That's the idea. You want to figure out what it is that you're doing that's not working, right? The best thing that you can do is tell me what I'm not doing right, because you're going to find a lot of stuff. So, build out your basic workflow diagram. Now, it can look something like this. It can be on a sticky, a napkin, draw it on your iPad. Doesn't really matter what your tool of choice is, and we'll talk about those here in a minute. But put it on paper. Like, actually draw how things work. Whether that's your day-to-day, routine, or how you're going to run your department, or a specific piece inside of it. It just gives you an idea of how your overall process works and what you're actually trying to accomplish. Here's the biggest one. It helps you when you're going to create your actual training material, especially when you're wanting to treat other people or train other people and scale and move to different areas of the organization. This is going to help you the most of anything that you can do, because most people are visual learners and they'll be able to see, okay, this is when I do this thing, this is the next thing in the line. Pretty simple to go from there. So here's some ideas of different versions. Patrick, you'll recognize this one. This is simply how they go from one place to the next. It's not super complicated. All it's doing is saying this is the anticipated process for the people that are doing it. Here's a little bit more complex one. So whereas the other one that we just saw was at a very high level, very top level structural, this is one single process in a very, very large process. All this process is doing is defining how the teams handle, find, and manage bugs in their process or in their software. So as a new bug comes up, they have a whole workflow of what they're expected to do when a bug gets published, right? But they have several development teams spread across multiple countries. They need this in order for everybody to stay on the same page. Or you can have something as simple as this, right? This is project management. Goes in your backlog, run through the intake process, go to sign off and push it out the door. Very straightforward stuff, and each one of these lines has actions that are happening as part of that, and that's part of identifying it. But it doesn't have to be super fancy or super complex. The idea is, what is it that you're doing? What are those things that need to happen on a regular basis so that I can keep doing things correctly? So some of the best practices around it. One of my favorite quotes. Everybody gets this quote wrong, by the way, because it's actually the second part that's the most important part. So if it isn't broken, stop worrying about it. But figure out the things that aren't working and focus on those, because that's the stuff that is actually the biggest problem. So as I mentioned, visualize it, literally draw a picture, right? Doesn't matter what your tool of choice is, figure out some way so you can look at what your overall day-to-day process, workflow, what it is you want to do is. Start at a high level, right? Don't try and boil the ocean, if you will. Start at here are the key elements of my day, and then for each of those, if you feel like you need more detail or more information around that, drill in at a deeper level at that point. But only go as deep as you need in order to maintain consistency. For some people, that's wake up, brush my teeth, get dressed, drive to the office. That could be your workflow in its entirety, right? Some people may need to say, get up, put your slippers on, brush your teeth using Crest toothpaste, and put the toothpaste here, your toothbrush here, get in the car, you're gonna drive your car, not your wife's car. Like, they need an insane amount of detail to do that. Nothing wrong with that. Whatever level of detail makes sense for you, that's the level you go to. So, for example, product design, development, QA, prod support. Pretty simple, run it right through the basic development process. Or in a sales organization, sales, contract, delivery, follow-up. Inside of each of those, you may have their own process and their own workflow entirely, but you have to start somewhere. And just identifying the key areas of operation, that's the most important part. And then my favorite is be as simple as concise as you need to be while still being complete, right? You don't want to be fast for the sake of being fast. You want to be efficient because these are the things that need to be done. You're eliminating the things that don't need to be done. Simplify. Like I said, don't overcomplicate it. Make it as easy as possible for you and or your organization, right? If it doesn't add value, why are you doing it in the first place, right? Anything that you're looking at, you need to really evaluate whether it's actually adding value to your day, your product, your team, whatever. If there's no value add, stop doing it. It's a waste of everybody's time. Try and avoid duplicate effort. If you've got two areas of the organization that are doing very similar things, but they're in two different areas of the organization, so you let them do their thing, yeah, you probably should stop that. Whether that's in your day-to-day, if you and your wife are both doing grocery shopping, probably a good idea to just consolidate that because, one of you get some time back. Find commonalities and run with them, right? If you've got, good example is the grocery shopping, right? If you're shopping for one thing and she's shopping for another and, the kids might stop off and get something else on their own. Try and figure out what are the common things that need to be gotten and just send one person to go do them. It'll make life a lot easier for everybody. Make it your own. This is where I differ from a lot of people. I hate the stock processes that people say, follow this and you're going to be in good shape. I don't like that because there isn't a one-size-fits-all. That assumes a lot. That assumes that you're the exact same mentality or mindset as the process that you're following, or that your organization is structured in the same way that a given organization is, or they have the tooling that they have, or the expertise that they have. None of those things are consistent. So find the thing that fits for you. Don't fall into the trap of, well, Netflix is doing it, and they did this process, they got this down, so we should follow this process. That's great. Netflix is a world-class organization that gets some of the best talent in the industry. You may not have that level of talent yet. As good as you or your team are, they get the best. And so what works for them might not work for you. Maybe it does. Maybe that it's exactly the type of thing you want to do. but they're also designed to run at a several hundred developer organization shop. If you've got 3 people, that's way overkill. Similarly, along that line, don't try and take what you need to do and say, well, this process is close enough. We're gonna mold to fit what they're doing because we're pretty close in that regard. But then you're leaving out the things that you do need to do that are unique to you and make you you, right? That's your secret sauce. Why are you giving that up for somebody else? Second big one that everybody falls into this trap. Oh, we've got this tool that can do all of these things. Let's follow the process or the way this tool does this thing. That's a bad idea too, because that tool was designed by people that have a very specific approach in mind. And while there's lots of really good tools, it's really hard to tell X company, you know, I recommend this and this is the tool that you should use because of this reason. That's really hard to do when not every organization is the same. Right? Everybody has their own approaches and thoughts and the way they approach things. So don't try and shoehorn your approach into a given tool. So speaking of tooling, there isn't a perfect tool. I will tell you that right now. As many good tools are out there, there isn't a good one, or there isn't a perfect one. There's the right one for you and the one that makes sense, and you may have to use multiple tools to do multiple things. But if that works for you, keep doing you. The big one is the right tool lets you do your process and lets you follow it rather than forcing you to do it their way, right? Even if you find a tool that does all the things that you want it to do, if it doesn't let you do it the way you need to do it and the way your process and organization runs, but rather says, well, you have to do it this way, that's not the right tool for you. And don't choose a tool first, right? Don't say, well, let's find a tool and then let's come back and figure out what the process is. Because ultimately, 99 times out of 100, that tool probably isn't the right tool, or there's a better tool that makes more sense once you've gone through the process and actually understand what it is you need to do. And then my personal favorite, automate where you can. Anytime you can take a human interaction out of the equation, I know, there's concerns of the robots taking over and everybody losing jobs. That isn't the case. This is not a. This is the things that nobody wants to do anyway. And if someone just had to do this repeatedly day in and day out, they're bound to make mistakes. The easiest thing to do is automate where you can. A good example is had a client where they had a collection form for new people that they would, at the very beginning when they first contacted them, they would fill out a contact us form and send some information about the organization and their type of work that they do, et cetera, and they would capture that. And then what they would do, they'd go through this whole long process and then a bunch of manual phone calls and trying to collect additional information, and then they'd go to build the contract and have to do that all by hand. And so we took the initial content generated form and pumped that into a single system that captured who their clients were. And then when it was time to finish out the sales process, they clicked a button and the contract came out the other end with one thing they had to fill in. And that was what their value add specifically for that organization was going to be. Other than that, everything else automatically happened as part of the process. So what used to be a 4 to 6 hour process total got down to 5 minutes, right? That's significant time savings, especially when you're a small shop. So from a tooling perspective, some good tools to use on diagramming if you're a Windows person, God rest your soul. Visio is a good tool. It's kind of the gold standard from a diagramming standpoint. OmniGraffle on the Mac is a great tool as well. But my personal favorite right now is Lucidchart, which is an online app. It's got a bajillion features, and it allows for a lot easier sharing and collaborative working. It's the one I would recommend the most out of all of them. From a workflow process management standpoint, you can go, if you're an organization, something as complex as Jira. You can use Asana, you could use Trello, or the 80,000 other tools that are out there. Rindle's another good one that I've found recently that has some of all of the above's feature sets, but some of the automation itself built in. There's some stuff you can do there. And then automation platforms. If this, then that is the kind of most basic version. They have a web version. It connects with all web services. A lot of the online tools have a connection point of some sort, but it's pretty basic. Zapier is kind of this is the Mac Daddy of them. There's literally 500 plus services and tools that integrate with it. And if you can't do something, they've also got things where you can write custom JavaScript or Python code and build your own integration. There's some really amazing stuff that you can do with it. And then there's another version. Microsoft Flow is very similar to Zapier, but it has the one advantage that Zapier and no other tool has, in that it has native Microsoft 365 integration all the way through their development platform, their consumer products, etc. So talked a lot. It's y'all's turn to ask me questions. 11:30 on the dot, man. Look at that.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally agree on the context switch.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yeah.
What if you have multiple processes
Mm-hmm.
that you need to switch in between?
So there's a couple different schools of thought. There's one which is hyper-calendaring, which is you basically block off times of your day to do a given task and do it that way. I know some people that will only do meetings on Thursdays, right? They work on this thing on Mondays. They will do phone calls during the mornings or late in the afternoon, but this is their work time. It's between this time. It really depends on what it is. If you're trying to do it at a personal level, the blocking time off or assigning different days, day periods tends to work the best, because it allows you to group all of your things that do that thing together. The best thing that you can do is find a good task management tool that lets you add context to the activity or task that you need to do, so that you can say, show me all the things that are phone call related, or show me all my email related tasks, or show me all the development related things I have to do, right? Having something so you can group all of those things together is, so once you've figured out this is how I do those things or what I'm going to do, having set times to do them in, especially for yourself, it's what I found works the best.
Yeah. You read Deep Work?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Deep Work.
It's a great book. Yep.
Can you give us a 1-2 sentence summary?
It basically how to find your flow in your
Yep.
personal work.
This is taking that concept to beyond just yourself.
Big premise is don't context switch.
Yep.
Block off big chunks of your time in this same way, which I agree with. And what I struggle with though is completing a task
So
and having to switch.
I would say two things that helped me the most. One was hyper task management. Again, I'm ADHD, so if I get distracted, I really get distracted. And so having something that said, here's all of the things that I'm going to do all my phone calls at this time, right? I need to call all these people back. And having a list where I could say, here's all the calls that I need to make. And only doing email at a certain time of the day. Biggest killer for me was email. Patrick's learned this the hard way. I only look at my email in the morning and in the afternoon. Because if I don't, I'm probably going to get lost in other things and I'm not going to actually get anything done. So I actually closed my email application. One of my iPads doesn't even have a different email on it, simply because I don't want to see it. Because if I do, I'll get distracted by it. So
You don't turn off the text.
I don't. That's the one thing I don't turn off. But I do have to have some, I do have clients. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It gives me things to think about that I haven't.
That's the whole idea. None of this is a magic bullet. It's to make y'all think.
Yeah, but here's my question. So I couldn't really see your headings on the workflow diagram
Yeah.
you gave, and I heard you say, there are no one size fits all.
Mhm.
But it seems to me that there might be some big buckets that can kind of help me start framing my thinking. And
Yeah, and there are, I mean, so some of them are, what is your entry, like what is the prep work that you have to do for whatever that thing you're doing is? What is this setup, right? What does the entry point look like to get you started and get you working? What is the in progress state, right? The three cores are open, in progress, and done, right? But you have a lead in and an exit as well. So you've got about 5 key stages that you're going to focus on. You know, what those look like inside of those differs by the process, the person, the context that you're doing it in, the time frames that are involved. But those are, you're always going to have those core open, in progress, and done, regardless of what you're doing, right? The in progress is usually the extended one that's, you know, open and closed are pretty straightforward. But it's the, you know, what leads into the open and what comes out of the done. So is there post-production support that has to happen by somebody else that takes over at that point, right? Or during the in progress stuff, what all happens during there? Are other teams involved, et cetera? So, yep. Good questions though. And to that point, like, none of this is I hope that none of you would take the stuff that I said and go out and do exactly the things that you saw on the slides. But, you know, I do have the slides available if you want to see them, to review them. You know, feel free to ask me questions about them in more depth if you want. The idea is to make you think. Yeah.
I guess kind of touch on that question. Are there exercises that you found helpful to kind of get the idea of all the things that you
Close your computer and be lazy and bored for a little bit. I mean, that the best time that I've found to think through, and there's a lot of behavioral science stuff going on and research going on right now around this, but there's a primary and a backup mental model that your brain uses. When you're actively doing something, that's your primary, and it's doing great. But when you step away and turn it off, your backup kicks in and keeps working on the same stuff without you realizing it. So that's why when you get bored and lazy and, you know, just sit around doing nothing, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I could probably do it this way, or I could do it that way. It's the best time to, like, take the time and draw it out, right? I prefer drawing it on a whiteboard, even if I have an iPad or my computer or something that would be a much easier thing to do. The first version typically is always on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, simply because A, I can't get distracted, and B, it lets me literally step back and look at the whole picture without trying to focus on any one thing. I would not do it digitally to start with. I would do it manually.
There's neuroscience backing that up too.
I know.
Back in the keyboard, both sides of your brain, both hands.
Yep. Like I said,
Both sides of your brain,
there's all kinds.
one hand.
It forces you to focus on the thing that you're doing, and your brain processes it differently. There's a whole bunch of science around it. If you want some really good information and to read a lot or find a lot, there's a blog called the Farnham Street Project. Farnham Street, F-A-R-N-A-M Street. But it's basically a collective of a really group of really smart people writing papers and doing research on topics just like this. And they have a really, really good podcast that goes along with it called the Knowledge Project. And they actually interview the people that have all of the science and all of the research behind it. And, you know, they've got people on there like the former SWAT commander for New York City, right? Talking about the whole, you know, he was one of the lead hostage negotiators for the SWAT team, right? Going through his thought process and just listening to how these different people do these different things will really let you see outside of your comfort zone and what your box is and look at things from a different perspective. So.
Do you have any other podcasts / books?
A good one, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Merlin Mann. He has a podcast called Back to Work. And it is, at times it can be, it's him and one other guy, and at times they can be kind of rambly on random subjects, but he's one of the front runners in this whole productivity, better working model, and he's been doing it maybe the longest of all the people in the internet space. And so he's a really good guy to look at and follow and look at some of his blog. I think his blog is 43 Things. So that's a good one to check out. And then Hurry Slowly is another good one. Jocelyn Glei, if you've ever heard of her. She's wrote a couple books on the subject, but the big takeaway is stepping back and slowing down and taking a look at what the things that you're doing and do the things that are the most important to what you're trying to accomplish. And she interviews some really, really good, smart people. And then for those of you that watch TED or listen to some of the TED things, NPR has a good one called the TED Radio Hour, where they take a collection of various talks on a similar subject or theme and combine them into an hour to an hour and a half long podcast around that, interviewing and talking to people, mixing in some of their content from the TED stage with live interviews with them to have a kind of a conversation about that theme. And there's some really, really good ones around just working models and, why we think certain ways and how we work certain ways. That's one of my favorites. And then just for entrepreneur stuff, How I Built This is a really good one. It's basically interviewing the founders from all the famous brands. You'll learn insights and things about your favorite products that you had no idea how they started or what the backstory was. That's really interesting. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
As a sole entrepreneur, I just started a business like 2 months ago. Just like
I'm so sorry.
constantly scrambling something is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I can't really relate your whole like in and out workflow to what I do on a day-to-day basis because I feel like everything is separate and everything is.
So, and that's where I said start with the high-level concepts, because the day-to-day basis, a lot of people try and cram everything into a single day, and sometimes you have to, depending on what your job is. But to his point, it sometimes works a little bit better if you figure out what are the things that you need to do to make your business successful, and then figure out when the best time to do those things are, right? If you have if you do development, for example, when do you do your best development work? Block that time off and just do your development work during that time, right? That may be from, 8 o'clock at night to 3 in the morning. Great. Figure out when you're going to do the other stuff. If you're going to do it, before you do that at the end of everybody else's day, like what are those things that have to get done, and figure out when the best time to do them are, right? If you try and cram everything into a single day, or try and do all of the stuff that seems like it should happen in a single day, you'll get overwhelmed, and it will feel like you're running a rat race, and you can't get out of it, and you'll hit the burnout period. There's a reason they call it the trough of desire, or not trough of desire, trough of despair. Sorry, because at a certain point you hit a wall, and it's going to happen where you can't do it all, and it seems like no matter what you do, you can't get out of the rut you're in. It's how you get past that your startup or your company actually gets out of it. And for some people, that's a really small trough, and for other people, that's months or years long. The organization that I showed you at the beginning, they went through it for about 10 years, right? They were a very, very small company. They got new leadership that came in, they rebranded and refocused their attention on their core products and made it consumer-oriented versus business-oriented. And all of a sudden, they grew like gangbusters. Like, I've never been in an organization that grew that fast. It was insane. But it took a reset of what they were doing and a refocus of, how do we do this stuff? When do we do this stuff? What stuff should we be doing? Kind of stuff. So the bigger question is, don't worry about your day-to-day. Think about what your organization needs to do overall. And if that's just you, what are all the things that you're responsible for? When can you do them most effectively? Yeah.
So, at the beginning of each day, do you sit down and make a plan for that day?
I try and do it the night before
Okay, well,
because I'm not a morning
so
person.
the second question was, what is that process?
So I tend to have a very large task list and to-do list. And so I tend to go through that. I have the standard prioritization. These are low importance, these are high importance. But I also have a flagging system that let me say, these are the things that have to get done. And the next day or have to get done, it is on a specific day, right? And so I will start with the list of, okay, for the things that have to be done tomorrow, I have to do these things. These other things are really important as well, but if I don't do these things, for example, I don't get paid. Or I have a client that I'm not going to have next week, right? It's that kind of stuff that I have to prioritize and identify that stuff first. And then I try and come up with, all right, I have this much stuff to do that looks like it's roughly going to be about half my day. So in these 3 hours that I'm going to have left, or 5 hours, or whatever that window that's left is, what are the 3 things that I can most effectively get done that it will add the highest value for that day, right? Only plan 3 things, and there may be some days you can't plan 3 things, but don't plan more than 3 things to get done.
How long does the planning process take? You block out like 30 minutes? Like
I block out 30 minutes on my calendar, and it typically will go from, some days I can get through it really quick if it's nothing crazy that's on the schedule. If I'm on a project, it could take as long as an hour. Just trying to make sure I get all the things done that need to get done, plus client commitments, project requirements, etc. So, on average, 15 to 20 minutes. It's a really quick thing. I've got it on my iPad, so I can usually either at the very end of the day or literally at the end of the day while I'm laying in bed, right before I go to bed, that I'll go through and set up the next day because I don't want to do it in the morning. If I wait till in the morning, first thing I'm going to do is check email, and then it's a downhill spiral, and it's noon before I look at my to-do list, and all of a sudden I've got, oh crap, I got to get all this stuff done, and then the things that probably needed to get done didn't get done. It doesn't work out well. So, yeah. Find a good task tool. Depending on your platform, there's a bunch I can recommend. I've tried pretty much all of them. I'm beta in a new version of one now that I really like. Just depends on what your platform is and what your mental process is. So, and I know some people that only use a calendar. Right? They schedule everything as tasks or time blocks on the calendar. So, yeah. Yeah. So I'm a Mac and iOS guy. There are 2 that are far and away the best. OmniFocus is the new version that's coming out, I think, is the best version of all because it's a lot more flexible in the context. Before, you could only have a single context of something. Now it's more like a tag-based system where you can add multiple contexts to it. So that's pretty nice. Second favorite and easily the prettiest and nicest to use is called Things 3. All of these are cross-platform, by the way. They work on phone, tablet, laptop, if you're in the Mac space. If you're not in the Mac space, there's really only one I recommend, and that's called Todoist. It's not the prettiest to look at, but of all of them is the most powerful because it works with if this, then that, then Zapier, and you can have it scheduled when this thing over here happens, put something on my to-do list with the appropriate scheduled thing, and you don't ever have to think about it. Like, it's just on your to-do list. The new version of OmniFocus has some capabilities like that coming, which are going to be pretty cool. But depending on what your platform is, I would go with one of those 3. So just depending on, and each of them have a slightly different working model. They make sense to me, but the most flexible one of them is probably Things or Todoist. OmniFocus is a lot more in the get things done, GTD mindset. The newest version gets away from that a little bit more than they have in the past. But if you're not a GTD type of person, which read David Allen's book on it, there's a lot of stuff you'll learn about just how to get through your day. But if that model doesn't work for you, either Things or Todoist are probably better suited. And then there's other ones that are just, there's one called task paper that is literally, there's a certain syntax you use for keeping it in a plain note text. Like just have a running text, right? Doesn't really matter what it is as long as it works for you. So, but the three I mentioned, I can highly recommend. They're all really good. So.
I got one on my down. I like it.
What? I haven't tried it, but yeah, if it works for you, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's there are some things, and I'm the kind of person that I will check anything and everything out. I mean, part of the nature of what I do is playing with things. So I'll go and check it out after this, just because I haven't seen it before. But anything new that comes out, I'm constantly scouring. You don't want to look at my purchase history from iTunes because I don't let my wife see it. Let's put it that way. I've checked everything out, and I'm looking for things that make my life easier. And those three that I mentioned, I bounce between them because depending on the version and what they've added feature-wise, make more sense at a given time. So, plus it's also a good way for me to reset, and because I keep such a big to-do list, it's really hard to keep it current or updated. So it's a good time to do that. Yeah. What else, guys? Anything else? Yeah.
How long do you plan to make a change into your personal workflow besides so like you set aside some time for you
Because of the nature of my job, I'm constantly doing that. Not necessarily intentionally, but I'm constantly reevaluating. Where I consciously do it, maybe once a month or every other month. I try not to make too big of changes all at once. It's more, what are the current, it's more resetting expectations around what my needs are rather than reevaluating the things that I've been doing in the past, right? It's more setting down and saying, okay, what am I doing now? Like, what does my day-to-day or week-to-week look like that I need to stay consistent with? And that's been more what it is rather than revisiting, the day-to-day on a regular basis because that stuff stays consistent. For me, it's never consistent. It's more, the hardest part for me is remembering to sit down and reset because I'm now doing a bunch of different things that I wasn't doing, 6 months ago, and, I'm trying to shoehorn them into what I was doing before. So, yeah, cool.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there any personal sort of tips or tricks that you use as supplements to getting in a better flow? Like I drink, this sort of tea, or I always go on a walk before I switch contexts. Is there any random personal?
For me, no. The big one is I consume an ungodly amount of caffeine.
Take notes, people.
No, I don't. The last doctor's appointment I went to, I had drank 3 Monsters already, and it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And my heart rate was about as perfectly steady as it, it was complete. I told the lady, she's like, that's not possible. I'm like, trust me, it's possible. I mean, for me, inconsistency is consistency to some degree. I don't have rituals or routines, but depending on the type of person that you are, those are incredibly helpful. Some of the most successful people that I've seen have to do, if they don't have their tea first thing in the morning, the rest of the day is shot. They're not going to get anything done. That's just the nature of it. What the biggest thing for me is an ability to lock out everybody else. So good headphones, right? Or good music that is not something you have to pay attention to. I don't advocate listening to podcasts while you do it because it's hard to process 2 different things unless you're doing tasks that you can do on autopilot while you're focusing on a podcast. But having music playlists, whether it's classical music, hip hop, trance, dance, whatever your flavor du jour is, right? Have something that allows you to hear it and use it to block out noise and distractions, but not have to actually pay attention to it. And there are lots of studies that, different types of music and tonal patterns actually can help tune your brain to do better focused work. So there's different, I think Headspace or Brainscape are two of them that have special audio content designed specifically for that. For me, I like something loud and with a fast beat and fun. It doesn't really matter beyond that. Yeah.
Oh, can I ask that? There was a website I went to, and the details like tell you what kind of is the best for you to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also Spotify that has like a study playlist.
Yep.
That I really
Yeah. Spotify and Apple both have really good content selection around topics just like that, right? They have a student's workflow section, a study one, a get work done section, right? It just, and Spotify has the same thing. Just figure out what your, that's another one that I've had a lot of people say really, really like that. Binaural. So.
All right, got
Cool.
Any last questions?
I'll get Jeremy the slide deck, and
Yeah.
if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of one
You'll
of
be
us.
here for like a couple minutes?
I will be here. I think I'm going to be here the rest of the day.
Cool.
So,
There you go. One more round of applause.
thank you guys.